Welcome to part 2 of the video class that I recorded for David Cobb's Wild Rivers Coast workshop back in March. In this segment, I'm teaching time blending and exposure blending techniques in Photoshop. In part 1, I demonstrated a complete developing workflow on an image in Lightroom. I'll link to part 1 both up here and down below. This spring, David Cobb is carefully bringing his photography workshops back. To keep it all safe, the guest numbers are low, everyone drives their own vehicle, and all the sessions are outdoors or online. Normally, I'd be there to help teach in the field and also give an image developing lesson, but for the time being, I'm recording them instead. Since so many of us have not been able to attend workshops or gather in groups for quite a while, David thought it would be cool to make the recordings available to everyone through my YouTube channel. So I've included a link to David's website below as well if you want to check out his workshops. So let's go back in time to March 2021 and watch younger Sean teach some Photoshop blending techniques. Let's now move on to some stuff that you can't do in Lightroom that you can only do over in Photoshop. And the first thing I'm going to do is what's called a time blend. So let's open up some images and head over to Photoshop. And over here in Photoshop, I've opened 3 different images, 3 different exposures from the same scene without moving my tripod. And this was a great day at Thor's Well up the coast from where you guys are. You can use this technique any place where you've got some wave motion and it just isn't possible to get all the waves throughout the scene behaving properly all at the same time. So you can take multiple exposures of different waves over time and then blend them together, and this is called a time blend. I find for really dramatic wave photography on the coast, especially when you're shooting down the coast where waves are hitting all throughout your frame going out towards the horizon at different times, because when you're there, you're experiencing those waves, crashing, and you're seeing them all happening. But any one photo may only catch one wave at a time. And so that just one wave doesn't really necessarily capture the feel of the entire scene and what it was really like to be there. So I've got this photo, which this is my base photo. So this has got most of the wave action. I got lucky in this one. So I love what's going on back here. I love this in the foreground and a lot of what's going on around Thor's Well here, but I don't like really the water texture and how filled in the well is. So this exposure I took, and it doesn't have a lot of the great wave action in other places, but going down into the well is much better. And this was a longer shutter speed. So this shutter speed was great for this really fast moving water that's up close. I don't love it in this part of the ocean back here. So I like the shutter speed on this one better for this more kind of impressionistic wave motion in the background. And then this, and I like this one little burst of a spray coming up back there. And then this third exposure was taken either much earlier or I think earlier before the light got really rich and golden like that. So the light's not as great in this one, but I love the action of it spilling down into the well here. And because that was in shadow anyway, I think that the color of that will match okay with the color of the other images as well. So what you need to do is just get those stacked all together, all those as layers in one image document in Photoshop. And then make sure that they're aligned. And if they're not aligned, then you need to move them into alignment or use Photoshop's auto align feature, something like that. And then I'm going to turn off this top exposure. And this could be, I've got 3 different frames here, but you could have as many frames as you have waves that you want to blend. So I'll turn off the top one, and then I'm going to add a black mask to this one right here, which you can do by adding a mask and then inverting it to black, or you can just use the black mask button here in the TK panel if you happen to be a TK panel user. And so now that black mask is concealing what's going on this layer. This layer's off. So now all we're seeing is just that background layer. And I'm going to use this button, or I can hold down the shift key and click on the mask to turn the mask on and off. So I can see, okay, where's the stuff that I want to grab from this other exposure? Okay, so I'm kind of eyeballing in on that. So now with a white paintbrush, at, let's see, 40%. That's probably a good enough flow. And flow with 100% opacity and 40% flow, the flow will allow me to, each pass of the brush will give me another 40%. And so I can paint back and forth and slowly build up the paint. It's a little more painterly way to work rather than getting all 100% all at once, or getting, a little bit one time and then having to click and unclick and do multiple swipes. So in here, I'm going to start painting in this area because this is where I want to bring in these waves. Now all my rocks haven't moved, so they're going to line up. And the waves are what I want to, or the water motion is what I want to blend. And the nice thing here is that moving water doesn't really have hard edges, so it just blends really nicely and seamlessly. We don't have to really worry too much about, where the edge of our painting is going. And yeah, I want to leave this little spray there. I want to leave this stuff over here. So like I said, I think just this kind of cascade coming over right there. And let's see, what else did I want to pull from this exposure? Oh yeah, that little guy way out here. So this little spray popping up back there. And if I end up going down too far that way, of course, you just switch over to a black brush and paint the other direction and get it back. And so that's just a little detail right there. Now I can go back to my white brush, and I did want to bring in all of this other softer wave motion out there. So with my white brush, I can start painting this in out here and just kind of along here and through this area. Yeah, something like that. And now the final layer, I think that's good for this one. And now the final layer is just this one, and that's just for this area in here. So again, I'm going to add another black mask to that layer, white paintbrush, and use that to paint this wave or cascade motion that I like back in here down into the well, something like that. And now I have done this time blend. I started here with my base image and was able to add in some wave action from a couple of other exposures. And now from this point, I could either flatten this if I felt I was done with it, or I could merge all these together into a smart object in case I felt I needed to come back to those masks and layers again. I talk all about the idea of how to use smart objects like that in the latest course I had that just came out not too long ago. And then once I had it either flattened or converted into a smart object, then I would just carry on with the rest of my image developing on this like it was any other image that had come out of my camera this way. Okay, now we are going to do one more thing that I want to show here in Photoshop. And this is something that I cover quite often, and that's exposure blending. But let's look at exposure blending an image on the coast. This is a lighthouse image from Bandon. You don't have any lighthouses actually, or not too many right close where you guys are on the coast. But if you ever get out on anywhere on the coastline, lighthouses are a great photo opportunity when you have them. So I've got a bright exposure and a dark exposure. This is properly exposed for the sky, but my landscape is really dark. And if I tried to recover that, it would be very noisy and not good image quality down in those shadows. This is exposed for my foreground, but of course now I've completely blown out the sky. So this is a situation where you just can't get the full exposure in one frame in the camera. So you bracket exposures and then blend them together. And in Photoshop, I teach this a lot. But again, in this latest course that I did with smart objects, I show that the power of using raw smart objects when you're exposure blending makes the best possible exposure blends you can do. So let's just take a quick look at that. So I've got both of these images here selected, and now I'm just going to right click on them, and I'm going to go to Edit in Photoshop. But I'm going to open them as smart objects in Photoshop. And these are the raw files, and I haven't done any editing on these raw files yet. They're just the straight raw files. I'm going to leave all the raw editing, other than things like spot removal and chromatic aberration removal and maybe even some general white balance and that kind of stuff. But all the other stuff I'm going to leave until later when I'm working in Photoshop. So open those as smart objects into Photoshop. And now over here in Photoshop, I've got the two smart objects opened up as separate image files. And I need to get them stacked together into a single image file, but normally you can't open them that way because you can't open smart objects already stacked like you can just regular layers. And if we copy and paste, then that also breaks the smart objects. So what we have to do is stack them in a very certain way. If you have the TK panel, the real easy way is Tony Kuiper has put this stack action in the TK panel. So you just click that and whatever images you have open, it just stacks them, closes the extras, puts all the open image files together into one image document, and just really quick, easy way to do that. But since we just have two here, I'll just show you the other way you can do it. Another way, there's lots of ways to do anything in Photoshop, is if you grab the Move tool and then you hold down the Shift key. And holding that Shift key, if you grab one exposure and drag it up onto the tab of the other one, and then still holding the Shift key, drag back down and release the mouse, that will stack that other smart object on top of the first one and keep them aligned and also not break the smart object. But then you still have to go back and this other one, because we made a copy over there, now we're gonna just close this one. We don't need that one anymore. Okay, so here we are with our stacked images, our exposures, our light ones underneath, our dark ones on top. That's how I like to have them. And the first thing we need here is a blending mask. So I'm going to make my blending mask, and this is a great use for luminosity masks. I'm going to make my blending luminosity mask from the lighter exposure. So I've got the dark one turned off. And now in the TK panel in the Go module, I'm going to pick a luminosity mask source by clicking this button. And starting off, that looks pretty good with a lights 1. Let's see what a lights 2 looks like. A lights 2 really separates that land from the sky, but I might want to look and just see if, yeah, the red channel also has a little better separation. So I'm just finding the right mask to do what I want here. And the other thing is I think I can lighten up that sky. I want the sky to be white. I want the land to be black. And the water here can actually be light as well, because that was also pretty bright exposure in that lighter exposure. So let's see, I can modify this mask, trying to get that sky to look a little whiter there, maybe somewhere in there. And then now I'm also going to further modify with some paint brushes. I'm going to get the black paintbrush and use that to just paint out the whole foreground, because I know I want all of that coming from the light exposure. And I'm going to grab the white paintbrush here and use that to paint white into the sky up here, because I know I want all of this coming from the dark exposure. And I've got this little bit of issue right along here. I'm going to go over into rapid mask mode, because that gives me access to a dodge tool that'll allow me to dodge that and just get that right down to the edge. Okay, I think that's looking pretty good for my blending mask. So now I want to apply this mask onto this dark layer. So with this, making sure that's the active layer here, I can just click this button to apply that mask there. And now when I turn that on, we can see already that's a great exposure blend. Really flawless, looks perfect because of that mask we made. But now with the two raw smart objects, I can still go back to the raw information in Camera Raw by double clicking and opening them up and fine tune them so that they blend together even better. Right in that transition zone where the mask is controlling the transitions. So here is my darker exposure. The sky is looking mostly how I want. I might bring down the highlights in the sky a little bit. Might bring up the overall exposure a little bit. And then I also want to bring up the shadows. And what I'm doing here is just trying to make my image look as close to the final image as I can, but I'm not really worried. I'm just getting it so the transitions will blend better. I don't have to worry if I'm getting noise in here, because none of this is going to be used in the final image. That's all coming from the lighter exposure. So just trying to get it to more closely match what my final image will look like. maybe let's say something in there. And this is my sky exposure, so I could also warm up that sky a little bit if I wanted to warm it up. And if I wanted to bring in a little vibrance or saturation into that sky, I could do that as well. And then I'll click OK and let that update back here in Photoshop. So already that's helped the blend quite a bit. Now I'm going to open up the lighter exposure, and we're going to do the same thing with that in Camera Raw. So for this one, I'm going to get my foreground looking just how I want it. So I can still open up the shadows a bit and the blacks a little bit, but I'm going to bring down, let's see, actually, well, let's see, where maybe leave the exposure here and bring down the highlights, just again to get this area in the transition zones to blend better. Keep those shadows opened up, and these are going to be my nice clean shadows coming from this lighter exposure. White balance in there I think looks okay. I might want to bring up vibrance a little bit and a little bit of saturation just for that warm light on the grasses. Let's update that. And now that should be a near perfect blend. So you can see we're able to recover those lost highlights in our sky. And if we zoom in on it and take a look, we can see that it all just blends perfectly. No edges apparent or halos or anything like that because of this mask that we're using to do the exposure blending, combined with being able to work with that raw data to get that blend to happen. Now, one more really cool thing that I'm going to show you just to finish this off is, again, I'm done the blend. I may need to come back and work with that raw data again at some point, or I may want to work with the mask some more. So I don't want to flatten that and lose access to those layers. So I'm going to select them both, and I'm going to convert both of these. Let me close the Go panel. Convert both of these to a smart object. But what that'll do is put those together into a one layer smart object. So it's like just a single layer, single exposure. But if I ever need to get back to those raw adjustments or my masks, I just double click on that smart object and it opens up and I can continue working with them. But now that I'm here like this, let's take a look at this. Let's see. So I want to kind of zoom in here a little bit on the lighthouse. Now the abandoned lighthouse, the Coquille River Lighthouse, hasn't had a light in it for I don't know how many years, a lot of years. But wouldn't it be great if it did have a light in it? Well, let's put a light in it. So I'm going to add a empty layer, just a blank layer above this, which is this button in the layers panel or this button in the TK panel. And I'm going to set the blending mode of that layer to color dodge. And I'm going to grab a white paintbrush at a low flow, like 20%. And I'm actually going to zoom all the way in here. And now with a nice small brush, I'm going to start where that light would be. Just give it a little click there. And then I'm going to go a little bigger, give another click, a little bigger. And yes. So now we're starting to get a light in the lighthouse. And I don't love the color yet. So, oh, and you know what else? Let's open up the blending options of this layer. And we need to make sure that transparency shapes layer is unchecked. There we go. With that unchecked, now this begins to let the colors come through and looks much more realistic, going down to just 10%. So there's our light from the lighthouse coming in. And I can go pretty bright with it here, right in there. And now I'm going to add another empty layer and not change the blending mode of this one. And I'm going to, instead of a white brush, grab a colored brush. And the colored brush is going to be kind of a orangey color coming from in the layer. And I'm going to go slightly yellower with that, I think. But let's try that. And now, again, low opacity or low flow, just 10%. I'm going to just use that to add a little bit of a lighthousey glow coming out of that. So now we've added this great lighthouse light into our lighthouse that doesn't have a light. So that's a lot of fun.